The do's and don'ts of a group discussion are quite a tricky topic, and I myself am a little nervous about taking it up because there are so many things that can simply go wrong in a group discussion. And the reason is that because you're so much in focus and so much under the spotlight, and so many people are looking at you, and all of them are strangers, you kind of feel that pressure building. And even if you are a very good speaker and you are really used to being in debates and in symposiums and stuff, just having all that attention and energy in that room and having all the focus on you still can make you slip up or say something bad or even make an expression which is just not good. So let me ease your mind and bring a lot of relief to you first of all by saying that a lot of it is all in your head. Okay, believe me when I say this, that after moderating what could be over 1,000 group discussions myself, I have come to understand that a lot of the expressions that we have for ourselves, they don't really come out as much as they happen in our own minds. And some students who are a lot more aware of themselves than maybe some others are would come to me after the group discussion and they would say, but did you notice that I did that at that moment? And I felt like I was looking really angry at that moment. Or I felt that that time I got a little annoyed with the person who was speaking. And I mostly find myself saying, yeah, but it didn't come out as such. It didn't come through as such. So the thing is that what we think that we do with our face, about 20% of it kind of shows to the other person. And the reason is quite simple. The reason is that not everybody is aware of your facial expressions. So even if you have a certain kind of smile for a certain kind of irritation, people might just see it as a smile and they will not register it as such. So ease yourself a little bit more and give yourself a lot more freedom of expression. When you're going into a discussion, it's okay to feel annoyed or angered or frustrated or ashamed or irritated or even just scared. It's okay to feel all of those things, and trust me when I say that about 20% of it is going to show on your face. Now, let's talk about the other extreme, which is that what happens when people do express themselves quite clearly and it comes across as a little negative. Now, in those cases, first let me give you a couple of very specific examples. See, discussions are a place where people's opinions, they get really clarified, and people express themselves about a lot of things that they believe in. It is quite possible that they might say something that does not really sit well with you, especially if it's about something sensitive such as a gender equality issue, a caste or creed issue, especially because we are in a country which does look at it in a certain way, class issue, race issue, or even money sometimes. All of these are things which we think about and which we live, in our day-to-day lives, and we talk about it on a daily basis. So having somebody say something less than acceptable in a group discussion can give you the reason to feel a little annoyed and angered. The skill is to not have a reaction right there and then. Okay? If somebody says that, yes, but we see that girls usually do that, or we see that boys always are like that, we understand that these are gendered comments. But ask yourself a question when you're preparing for GDs, that just by pointing out that somebody was making a gendered comment, a sexist comment, a comment which was not really equality oriented, just by pointing it out that, hey, you were sexist at that point, or hey, how can you say that, which is a very common question, by the way, in GDs. Everybody asks each other that. Just by pointing that out at that point, are you going to be able to change that person? Are you going to be able to affect their sensibility in any way? Are you even going to be able to incite them enough to think about what they said? I'm thinking not, because here's the thing, all of you are in the same boat at that time. All of you are focused on doing your best and preparing and presenting yourself the best. Nobody is at that time in a reflective mode. Nobody's thinking a lot about how they are coming across to the other person. They're just thinking, here's a point that I can think about and I can speak about, I'm going to speak it. In that, if somebody happens to say something that doesn't sit well with you, don't take it upon yourselves to write them there and then. Okay, move on from it, right? So that's one of my most sincere pieces of advice, and I always give it to students, because while I completely agree that there are certain things which are just not acceptable, you should always keep some space for comments which just get made because somebody is fervently speaking, somebody is speaking passionately, and they just kind of said something in the flow of their comment. Let that go, because that way you also become the bigger person, and you keep your peace of mind for making your own argument a few seconds later. Another thing that becomes quite a point of concern is our tone and our voice modulation, and also sometimes the words that we use. So I'll give you a couple of examples. When you're addressing a fellow speaker in the group discussion, it is often seen that people use words such as sir and ma'am. Now there are a couple of problems with that. One, sir and ma'am is a bit of a dated concept, and we don't address people as sir and ma'am unless they're very senior to us, especially in age. So and I say this to a lot of my students all the time, that especially when I'm introducing a class, I ask them not to call me ma'am, because it makes me feel really old. Because I understand how it's like a very dumb thing that people in schools and colleges call their professors and teachers ma'ams. But ma'am or madam is kind of a word which is reserved for the older ladies, and you know, I would very much like to avoid that for as long as I can. But jokes apart, when you call somebody sir and ma'am and they're not exactly very much older than you are, chances are they will be mostly your age, you kind of can come across as a little sarcastic, as a little satirical, okay? And you don't want to do that, especially when there is a lot of possibility of you becoming a little angry or annoyed, like I told you before. So at that time, addressing somebody as sir or ma'am just sounds very sarcastic, sounds very tongue-in-cheek. Instead, a good way of addressing the participants in the discussion is my fellow speaker. First of all, it's the best response because it's not a gendered response and it goes for everybody. And second, there is no way that you can make my fellow speaker sound like a sarcastic comment. Third, a good advantage is that you can actually point to people. So let's say I'm sitting in a semicircle and there are people all around me, and somebody has just finished making a point. I will simply say, well, what my fellow speaker has just said, and I agree. And that's a really politically correct and a very respectable way of saying that. Instead, if I say what sir has just said, it immediately registers itself as a little bit sarcastic. The second thing is about tonal modulation. Now, small expressions such as, oh, I don't think so, or I don't agree, or I agree, or thank you very much. These are expressions that can turn into sarcastic comments and into sincere appreciations depending on how you say it. So listen to this. If I say, oh, thanks a lot, that's okay. But a lot of people will say thanks a lot, which makes it sound like they're not thanking you, and in fact you did not do them a favor at all. And all the time in group discussions I hear people saying thanks a lot, thanks a lot, thanks a lot, and that simply makes it sound like they're absolutely not thankful, and instead they're critiquing you for speaking out of turn or for saying something that they wanted to say, what have you. So bear in mind that these fillers or these comments, they should be ideally used to fill up gaps in your sentences or to acknowledge something that somebody has said or done for you in the discussion. So your tone and the way that you deliver this will set the tone of how the other speakers will think of you. So for example, if somebody has made a very valid point and they have agreed with you, you can say, well, thank you so much for making that point and I completely agree. And that would be seen as a good, genuine gesture. And instead, and I'm not saying you mean it like that, but even if you don't mean it like that and you're in that flow where you just want to speak and you say, thanks a lot for saying that, dear sir, and I want to agree, immediately it just sounds like you lessened their importance and the point they made, its importance, and you kind of just put your point on top of that, and that's a bad move. So I hope that you're able to appreciate that I'm just making a very fine, nuanced point here. This is not something which is very obvious, and it only comes across when you've seen thousands upon thousands of group discussions. But it's a really important point, and I hope that you will remember it when you're preparing your own group discussions, and especially for being an effective speaker. Now, we've talked a bunch about how to study for group discussions and how to prepare content. But you know, a lot of the times you will realize that all that study will come to naught when you're sitting in that pressured environment and have people watching you. So let us talk a little bit about what to do or what to say when you run out of things to say. Now, remember in schools you used to have essay writing exercises, and all the essays will begin with the same sentence in Hindi or in English. And I remember that from my old school, our essays always used to begin, especially Hindi Nibandh used to begin with Bharat ek krishi pradhan desh hai, and things of that nature. Now, while these are perfectly good examples of collective essays which were written by all families, whole families would participate in that, it's not okay when you're a grown-up and you're having a group discussion. So never rely on quotations. Never rely on speeches made by famous people. There are several drawbacks to relying heavily on somebody else's words. The first one is quite obvious, that you're taking somebody else's words as opposed to your own. Okay? A group discussion is nothing if not a candid, spontaneous discourse on something that is equally talkable by anybody who knows any amount of information about that topic. So, to suddenly come up with a perfectly rehearsed quotation from Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. or even Obama or Maya Angelou, whoever, or reciting a two or three line poem or you know, reciting a verse, it just sounds really artificial. One of the biggest drawbacks of having a perfect quotation is this, that if you do not know which group discussion topic you're going to get, how is it that you have the exact appropriate quotation to quote at that moment? It is not possible. You cannot have such a long list of quotations prepared that any topic you get, you will just have something apropos to it. So instead of that, what it'll come across as to the moderator is that you've just forcefully kind of conditioned and tailored that comment and just made it fit somewhere. Now, whether it fits or not is another question altogether, but let me tell you that it's a really old, dated and non-appreciable device for group discussions, and you would much rather do without it. And to finish up on that, if you are running out of stuff to say and the content is not really flowing, sometimes what happens is that you are so focused on what you do not know about the topic that you're not even listening to all the golden points that your fellow participants are making. So at that time, you want to stop putting yourself in a sort of a trance and constantly reflecting on what you know, and instead start really listening to what your fellow speakers are saying. Two things that this will accomplish is, one, it will establish you as a really good team player, because when the moderator is looking at you and you're going, oh yeah, that's a good point, or yeah, I agree with that, I didn't think of it that way, nice, and just give a small thumbs up, give a verbal nod, what you're doing is you're establishing yourself as a really good team player. And the second and a good thing is, the beneficial thing for you is that now you're gathering information about that topic, you're letting other people have their moment, and then you'll be like, yes, and I would like to add to what my fellow speaker said, blah, blah, blah. Now that way you have established once more that not only are you good on thinking on your feet, but you're also respectful enough that you have allowed other people to finish their point, and now you have assessed it, okay, and you've thought about it, and now you're going to make your argument, making it into a group discussion as it should be. So content manipulation is something that you should really practice upon, especially, like I said before, when you're practicing with your friends, with your mates, with your class fellows, whoever, have them say things which you will not necessarily agree with, and then take your time, think about all sorts of parameters, all sorts of alternatives that you can have to that point, and then talk about it. And ask them, how did I do there? Did you like the way that I summed it up? Did you like the way that I agreed or disagreed with you? How would you give me feedback? And that way you will really learn that you're really a lot more capable than you think of yourself in terms of content manipulation. Remember, it's not always about how much you know, but what you make with what you know.